Again, a very warm welcome. It's almost 4 minutes after the hour here from Bangkok. And on behalf of the Netherlands Chamber of Commerce, a warm welcome to this Greentech Masters, the series which was started almost 2 years ago. Thanks for that, Manuel. And we have an exciting and exclusive online interview for this afternoon's program. But before I will hand over the microphone, so to say, to our Vice President, Manuel Madani, I would like to say a few words of welcome on behalf of our strategic alliance, the Netherlands Chamber of Commerce, in this ASEAN region, and formed an alliance. And we, as an ADCN banner, will also be sharing some thoughts with you about how we can support you and your businesses in this part of the world. So if you bear with me for a few minutes, I have only a few slides, and I'll just present a few items to you. Here you will see again what you will see is that we will have a few slides on the region, on our chamber network, but also the 6 chambers of collaboration. And feel free, if you have any questions at the end of the session, I'll guide you to a website as well. And I'll go to the next slide. I don't think I have to share the key facts of ASEAN and the booming area we are all working in or want to work in. So I'll skip this one, especially the topic today. It's a growing market, but I'm sure our speaker and Manuel will guide you through that. But what we are is a strategic alliance, and like I said, 6 countries consisting of Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, Vietnam, and we are based as Netherlands Chamber in Thailand. And what do? We try to share events, and where you as a member of one of each chamber are most welcome, especially now with physical events being active again in the region. So please do reach out and have a look at the shared calendars when you are traveling in our region. There is always an interesting event going on in one of the places surrounding us. Of course, we strengthen international connections, and it doesn't only have to be the Dutch Business Society. We really try to be as international as possible. And we look for opportunities of doing business, because although some countries might be easy, some countries are more challenging in the doing of business, especially, I think, in this part of the world. And that's where we as a chamber might be helpful in supporting you. Providing information, I guess, is vital, and increasing your network possibilities amongst the chairing chambers is also one of the key instruments we offer. I also won't bore you with these kind of slides, but there's no lie in saying that the ASEAN is a growing market, despite, let's say, all the areas around the world which might getting into an economic crisis. We see that ASEAN is still doing relatively fine. The last 2 slides are about my colleagues and the teams. So here you have, I noticed some members also from Vietnam joining the DBAV, or the Dutch Business Association Vietnam. The picture is Guido, my colleague who's running the show out of Ho Chi Minh, and also sometimes in Saigon and the North, Hanoi. Then we have DBN Indonesia. Sander is still the chair, although they have a new chair announcement very soon, and we'll pass that information on. Peter Hemmes in Singapore. She recently joined the ADD Dutch Cham, the Singapore Dutch Chamber, and she is now the counterpartner we have in Singapore. Malaysia, Marco Winter, he's organizing his annual gala dinner tonight in KL, so unfortunately can't join us today, but he's been around for many, many years. Our Philippine colleagues, the DCCP, the Dutch Chamber in the Philippines. Mitchell is always most helpful in connecting you further or supporting your business in the Philippines. And the picture on the right is myself. And last but not least, if you want to know more about what we do and how we can help you, please visit our website, which is the www.adcn.asia. And that's where you'll find all the information, but you'll also see our calendar of shared interests and events. Let me stop sharing these slides and let me pass the virtual microphone to moderator and also our Vice President of the NTCC, but in his normal life, Manuel Madani. He is the head of Priva Southeast Asia. He will be introducing our speaker Sky Kurtz, the founder and CEO of Pure Harvest Smart Farm. So I would like to ask Manuel to hand over the microphone. I understand this is a recorded version, and that when there are questions, you need to guide the audience in how would you like these questions to be answered by chats during your presentation or the end. But I will wish you a very informative session, and thank you, Sky, for joining this session, and thank you, Manuel, for taking over the baton, and wish the audience an interesting interaction. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Manuel. As Hans has shared, we are here with the Dutch Chamber Network in ASEAN, and every time we are hosting a foreign or external leader in the industry to bridge leadership know-how to the ASEAN region and give also perspective of what's out there. We have today a very special guest, and before we go there, the purpose of this Greentech Masters is to bridge that particular know-how and leadership into the Southeast Asian region that's currently lacking in the agri-food industry. It's a big region, and a lot of things have been going on, and people are still assessing markets, whether they are right to invest in and whether they are mature enough to go into. We've had over the last quarters also Temasek sharing their light on financials, markets, reports. And we've also had Godfrey Dole, which was with the Equilibrium Group, the head grower, which has a huge track record in building greenhouses in very tough climates. And today we have one of the fastest growing companies from out the Middle East, now also going beyond that scope into South and Southeast Asia. And I'm very happy to introduce to you the founder and CEO of Pure Harvest Smart Farms. Please ask questions through the chat box. I'll try to select them in the end of the session and see if we can get them answered. Sky, welcome to Greentech Masters. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for having me, and really nice to meet all of you.
It's absolutely amazing what you've accomplished in the UAE, and I think it didn't go unnoticed on the achievements and successes of Pure Harvest. We've seen its uniqueness. I think you've built a very nice company that is not easy to replicate. It has its own culture, its own brand, its own technology, and we've seen that you've grown a lot throughout the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and other parts of the Middle East. We'd love to dive into that. Before we get started, we also like to learn more a bit about you, since you have an extra different background than the usual farmer.
Sure.
That's going to be very interesting. Please take us away whenever you're ready.
Yeah, certainly. So thank you for having me, and to the audience, pleasure to meet you. I know it's a mix of people, aspiring entrepreneurs, existing entrepreneurs, people in agribusiness, people in industry, and it's a great and diverse audience, and it's a pleasure to meet you. I've prepared some slides that I think will give a bit of an overview of who we are, what we're doing, where we're headed, etc. But I'll also then, Manuel will ask some questions which I think can scare out a bit about addressing concerns or questions that have been raised to him from the audience and that he believes are relevant. So my time is yours. I want to help you to understand whatever you want. Please ask questions openly. And with that, let me quickly share my screen, and I will walk you through some prepared remarks, which will hopefully cover a lot of bases. There we are. Manuel, can you confirm you can see it?
There you go. If you could enlarge the screen a little bit.
Yeah. There we go. Is that good?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Sky.
Excellent. So with that, the title of this talk is about how are we achieving world-leading yields in one of the harshest climates on the planet. And we'll cover a bit about how we're growing, but also I think it's also about how did we even get the opportunity to grow and build a company that's been able to achieve what it has in the Middle East, and why we think that's transferable to South and Southeast Asia over time, and then possibly exploring the other side of the globe. We think there is growth opportunity for this sector worldwide. And maybe a bit about me. So I have an unusual background, as Manuel mentioned. I call myself a recovering investor. So I used to be I started my life in finance, but working first as a private equity investor in New York and San Francisco. But specifically, when I did my MBA at Stanford Business School, Stanford's famously a technology-focused school in the heart of Silicon Valley, and it kind of brought my life, and I call it being bit by the tech bug. It was hard to escape me. I moved into technology, and I started as an investment professional at a firm called Francisco Partners, which is an affiliate of a famous venture capital firm called Sequoia, investing in tech and tech-enabled services. But ultimately, I personally wasn't finding the connection with what I was doing and, sort of a calling, if you will. And I decided I wanted to leave and try to, pursue being an entrepreneur. But admittedly, I didn't have some big idea. I was kind of soul searching for what I could do that made me use my time and talents on this planet to do something meaningful. And I went on this adventure where I went to Alaska, then New Zealand, et cetera. And fundamentally, while I was in New Zealand, I was literally on a farm in New Zealand at a sheep farm. And I came to the idea of the first ag tech startup I started, which is a company called Fence. You see it there, which is the virtual fence. And we created a wearable tech solution that digitizes rotational grazing. So the first venture I started was an IoT-enabled solution for sheep and cattle farming. And then I met through the Stanford Alumni Network, my co-founder, Robert Kupsis, who introduced me the idea of controlled environment ag. So this is actually my second ag venture. And so I call myself now an agripreneur. But I'm happy to open up questions to that later. But this little word collage that you see on the bottom left was a bit about what drove me to this. And I think, and honestly, I was in search of purpose. I wanted to find a way to make an impact in the world using technology and things I was passionate about, knew something about, but in admittedly a field I knew very little about. I was not raised a farmer. Thank God I was able to recruit and partner people who are actual farmers, like my headmaster grower, Jan Prince, and now we have a team of over 9 agronomists, as well as a bunch of other different disciplines that make possible what we do. But I thought I'd mention that I'm still, I would say learning to become a farmer, right? I identify as one, but I'm in the end, my background is more in the business side and the formation of new ventures and securing capital and building technologies. But I luckily am able to partner with really capable people. And Manuel's heard me say this before, but stand on the shoulder of giants, right? This industry has been around for some time. There's a lot of capability in it, and a lot of that out of Holland, but also in other markets like Israel, the United States. And there's a growing body of knowledge of how to use technology to make farming more efficient and more special. And obviously, we are beneficiaries of that and are building upon that to tackle bringing these capabilities to new markets. So that's a bit about my background and how I got into this. Now, what do we do at Pure Harvest Smart Farms, right? I figured pictures were best. We use technology and harness it to make possible growing, high quality, safe, and sustainably grown fresh produce anywhere, even in the harshest environments in the world, like here in the deserts of Abu Dhabi, in Saudi Arabia, where we built with our partner Nadek, in Kuwait, where we're building now. We have projects underway in multiple markets here. And now we also have a project that we've announced in Singapore. So tackling the humidity and the warmth of that climate, but also we have development activities in many other South Asian markets. In fact, I just got back from the Philippines recently, but these are actual images of farms that we're currently operating. In fact, I was there last night. This is one of our farms in Al Ain in Abu Dhabi. And it shows kind of the contrast in the top right of the farm versus the unbelievable arid environment that it's operating in, where the temperatures hit over 51 degrees Celsius and humidity hits 100% for at least 4 months of the year. So it's an incredibly difficult place to grow food. Manuel, I saw a hand raised. Was that you?
Yeah, that was you giving the announcement that you were starting in Singapore. That was an applause. It's, not a hand raised.
No, thanks. Yeah, so no, we're finally venturing into South Asia. It's always been an aspiration, but I think you should expect to see additional announcements from us in the coming year. We're in development processes for new projects in new markets. And I hope and believe that a meaningful piece of our business, 3 years from now, probably half of the business at least will be in Asia. We consider ourselves a MEASA player. We are not only a Middle East player. However, we developed our solution in one of the harshest environments in the world, the United Arab Emirates, because we believed that if we could control the climate in that horrible environment, provide year-round sustainable production at a lower cost than imports, then the world and investors and others would believe us we could do it anywhere. And that turned out to be true, right? We're now transferring into markets like Singapore. Why did they partner with us when they could have partnered with anyone? is that they see a player who's actually delivered in an environment that's even more harsh than the one they're in. The humidities are high, the average humidities are high in Singapore, but the heat is nothing like what we see. So the combination of the heat and humidity, the enthalpy that we solve here is unprecedented. And so now that makes it easy to transfer this solution into new markets and for people to believe and credibly understand that this company can deliver the outcome they want of farming in difficult places. And we don't do that alone, right? I'll talk about our role in our partnership with Priva as well.
Sky, one step back. I think you share your background a little bit about being an investor and having this vision. Was it always? Was there any belief or dream that you could actually change the status quo, coming from an investor background into the agri-food industry?
Yeah, yes, I think so, Manuel. Maybe because of my training and discipline as an investor, I thought a bit differently about the use of technology to control climate, to make possible food production and the economics of that. And let me give an example. A lot of farmers and a lot of operators, I would say, that I had met when I was doing my own diligence on this opportunity, talked about things like a payback period on a farm. But interestingly, I thought about it a bit differently. I thought, this isn't a farm, this is food infrastructure. This is more analogous to a power plant, an airport, or a data center than it is to a traditional farm. So I actually thought differently. I said, no, what I need to be able to provide to an investor base to secure capital for this hugely capital intensive, long-lived asset is I need to prove a yield. I need to prove that there's earnings power per year that can provide a return to that investor's capital over a very long horizon. That alone, right, is a different insight into how to think about the capital intensity and what type of capital you could secure and deploy to achieve this outcome. And if you had a view that a 3-year payback or some arbitrary rule was what you were solving for, you would have never built the company that we built, right? Because you need to think in a different set of horizons and a different set of investors than would allow you to come to that conclusion. So Manuel, that's an example of where, because of my background, I was thinking very differently about how to both secure capital for and then ultimately build a business that would generate the returns that would allow us to attract more capital and to scale the business into new markets. The final thing I'd mention, Manuel, is about scalability. You mentioned this earlier, we went and built a company that had a lot of capabilities, right? We're an engineering construction company or a builder, design, technology, agronomy, consumer packaged goods, all these capabilities in one house, but that's expensive to maintain. We only built that under the vision that we would then build many farms and enter many markets leveraging a global brand. It's a very different way to view it than, hey, I'm going to build a project. We're not building a project, we were building a company with a set of capabilities to build many projects.
Yeah, well, just out of curiosity, Sky, how long was this journey? Because Pure Harvest has been skyrocketing the last few years, but I believe, how long are you on this journey?
Yeah, so I started begging, borrowing, and stealing money for this in 2016, right, to start the first one. And then really we secured in 2017 the millions of dollars we needed to build our first pilot and to capitalize the company for its first phase of development. We then operated that pilot for 2 years, right, because we have a big belief to fail small and win big. With that pilot farm allowed us to learn a ton about what didn't work, where to build redundancy in the system, what materials would fail in our harsh environment, what climate management, which Manuel, you guys know a bit about, how to solve that in the most capital and cost efficient and energy efficient way. All of that we learned over 2 years of monitoring a pilot. Only then did we raise a huge amount of capital, almost $100 million, and they began to build many farms, right? And that's the ramp we've been on in the last few years. But really, this development effort has been over 5 years. We're in our 6th year now of work. So it's not a small endeavor.
Yeah, well, big respect, and it's amazing what you guys are doing, and I hope you continue whatever you're doing. And please take us forward where you were in your presentation.
No, sure, and please do feel free to interrupt with questions that you think will elaborate on points people would be interested to hear about. So this is just an image, a graphical, like in the end, seeing the product lets you know what we're producing, right? This was not possible in the Middle East before we entered the market, right? All of these products are actual images of product we produce, and we're producing our tomatoes and our strawberry yields are, to our knowledge, the highest in the world, right? We're even over Holland, with all respect to our partners. and why we're able to harness the incredible amount of light we have here to capture. We're doing this quality produce year round, even in the harshest environment, but also with no use of artificial light. We're only now experimenting with supplemental artificial light. We're doing it all with natural light, and we're able to produce at bricks levels that are off the charts. The product is exceptional. It's beautiful, as you can see. And we're able to produce any variety. Like right now, we're producing 26 tomato varieties in one greenhouse, which is not common or best practice. It's actually very challenging, but we're doing that to meet a broad variety of needs of the market at the premium end and at the mass market end of the market. We're also growing tomatoes, leafy greens of over 14 varieties, including spinaches and arugula, and we're producing strawberries. And now we're expanding into melons, capsicums, which we just started production of, Manuel. You haven't even seen them yet. They're extraordinary. And we're producing melon, or I mentioned melons, also aubergine, so eggplants. And so now we've proven the ability to control the climate in the box. Now we're putting more things inside and expanding. And this is a bit on how far we've come, right? We started, as Manuel mentioned, back in 2017, but over time we've secured, we're serving now all the major retailers and distributors and high-end restaurants and mid-class restaurants here in the market. We've secured capital from some world-leading names like Franklin Templeton, Metric, IMM, which is the largest private investment firm in Korea. So we've really grown the business over the years. And down on the bottom left, we're currently operating 22 hectares of growing area in multiple crops, but we're also in development of projects this year that will more than double the business. And that doesn't count a pipeline of additional things. That's actually secured, named, announced, and in progress projects. So we're increasing the scale of the company now rapidly, trying to leverage that capability into new markets and, of course, build more products within the markets we're already in. And I think that a picture tells it all. That top image on the left is, if you can read the sign, it says, Pure Harvest grows a variety of tomatoes for Spinnies, including plum, cherry, candy, and heirloom varieties. I mentioned that Spinnies is a modern retailer in the United Arab Emirates and Oman that's a subsidiary out of the United Kingdom. And when we entered the market just 4 years ago, they had two options for consumers: either very high-end, air-freighted, high-quality imports from, say, Holland, Spain, Belgium, or they had local, seasonal, much lower quality, limited variety, and often high pesticide use product that's mass market, lower quality at a much lower cost, but only seasonally available. And there was nothing in between. We saw the opportunity to create a new category, premium local, use the best available production methods of like the European producers, but do that locally at a lower cost than comparable quality imports, but at a premium to the local seasonal low quality product, and to create and brand that new category. And this is the success we've had. Every product in that image is us, from the right, where we do mass market kind of loose product, all the way to exotic Yum black aromatic tomatoes. So I just want to highlight that that's the impact we've been able to have in a short period of time to transform the entire merchandising at the retailer, but also the experience of a consumer, the quality, variety, cost point, and safety of the product they can secure is totally changed. And now we're trying to replicate this in every market from here to Seoul.
Yeah, I think that is that also one of the uniqueness or one of the missions or culture within Pure Harvest, is that you want to serve this segment with premium local and not being one of the most expensive, not the cheapest, but having that particular sweet point. Is that embedded in the Pure Harvest culture? Or?
It is, absolutely. We even have debates on pricing. For example, if we're pricing a new product, we ask ourselves, does it adhere to our mantra of being lower cost than the comparable imports? It absolutely must. I have no interest in raising the cost to consumers of accessing, like accessibility is a key point. Affordable and accessible. Now, without a doubt, it's a different quality and different variety product even than the kind of much lower quality seasonal pesticide-ridden product. So it is not going to be at the same price point. It's like a Porsche versus a Pinto, right? However, we don't want that Porsche to cost Porsche prices. We're trying to do a Porsche at a Toyota price. And that the idea is to make it available to consumers, because we believe that for us and the retailer, by doing that, we grow the market. There's latent demand. The consumer that's buying at that high end will buy more, and the aspiring consumer will get to introduce and invite this quality of safe and delicious product into their lives, which will improve health outcomes. It does a lot for food security, for water conservation, for economic diversification in these countries and for sustainability. And that's our mission.
I think also when you look to Southeast Asia as a region, you see that we have these very luxury supermarkets where people are paying a super premium to get their strawberries or their sweet tomatoes. And there's, of course, this layer of tropical fruits that are produced by conventional field farms. The difference, there's little in between. And so, you know, the middle part doesn't want to adopt to the local field crops, and there's still a gap between the super premium crops. And I think I don't know how you see it in Southeast Asia, but our take is that Singapore, Hong Kong, and the rest needs to be growing to that certain point.
Well, so Manuel, I agree with you. I think the dynamics are very similar, right? I remind you, like the Middle East is in the end an Asian market, but we have the same dynamic where there's even people think of the United Arab Emirates as wealthy. In fact, it's not, right? We have around 10 million people. There's a subset of ultra wealthy. Then there's a smaller kind of middle and upper middle class, and then a massive, a lot of people from the Asian subcontinents that move here that are a labor class that are working on very limited incomes and exporting a lot of their money to their families, right? They're here for a reason. And so our market is much more like a lot of the Asian markets than people realize. And we have all those same dynamics. We have a highly consolidated retail base, limited modern retailers, and then mass, market, hypermarkets, and also what I call informal markets. Here we call it a bakhala, but it's like what you'd call a corner market, farmer's market, or wet market. And these types of things exist here too. And so what I guess the point I'm making is that it's analogous. The markets are very similar. There's a smaller premium end of the market. There's a much larger mass market, which is admittedly needs to be served as well. I also believe, Manuel, though, that not all of the market will be served by the highest level of technology solution. I believe there's different classes or investment levels of controlled environment ag, all of which can improve quality, improve availability, variety, safety, and reliability of produce. But the thing is, I believe it's what I call the cost, quality, control, sustainability frontier. So imagine like 4 points. Whenever you make a decision of what level to invest, you have to look at the market dynamic and say, am I creating an over-engineered tomato, right? That is over-invested for what the market will pay or can pay. And then in that case, move down tech, right? And you need to keep going until you solve the market. And then over time, develop the market as consumers are willing to invest more of their wallet, as they understand the value proposition, blah, 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 right? So I think that a lot of that needs to be done. It's a 5 to 10 year fix, not a 2-year fix.
Yeah, I agree. It's a long run. And talking about what you said, like growing this premium local crop, is not easy. And I think that's what unites the UAE and Southeast Asia region, that both are very harsh climates. And the other one has a bit more heat and sometimes 4 or 5 months of super high humidity, higher than Singapore, for example. But if we look to Singapore and other regions of Southeast Asia, at times we lack sunlight. And there's like Singapore, the last 6 months or 6 weeks, there was barely any sun. And growing a premium crop is super difficult. And people often tend to go to the highlands and build a semi-technology greenhouse that is not full tech, but it does a job. What is your take? How does Pure Harvest do it in the Middle East, and how do you think you can do it in
Manuel, you've heard us say this, but we view ourselves as an energy company, right? We're an energy transition business. We convert sun to calories as cheaply as possible, or to plant matter. And how to do that and what tools are available to do that changes based on what natural material or natural endowments you have. So how much light, what is the cost of energy, the cost of land, all these inputs drive the ultimate economics of that output. So how do we do it in the Middle East, for example? Well, here we're endowed with incredible amounts of light. For example, in Saudi Arabia, we not only use natural light, but we also have solar power. We're over 80% solar power. And our cost of power is less than half of that of the Riyadh grid. So we developed from the very outset renewable energy into the design of our entire business plan there. And not only because we care about sustainability, which we do, But what was good for the world was good for our cost structure. It actually made we were conscious of the amount of energy management that would be needed to inform the ultimate cost of a tomato. And now we're very competitive and we're doing very, very well in the Saudi market. Now that's a different equation, for example, you mentioned in Singapore, where you have to use supplemental artificial light. You actually, across the year, you actually have a lot of light, but like you said, you can have periods of cloud cover and issues that create light variability, which is a real problem for photosynthesis. So you need supplemental artificial light. To do that, you need capital and energy. So really it becomes about how do you find sources of either renewable or harvesting waste energy from others, as well as how do you find long-term, low-cost patient capital. And I think that these are the trade-offs that have to be made for different markets. Now, Singapore beneficially is a wealthy, high-value market that can also justify higher prices for higher quality. But that may not be true, for example, in mass markets in Malaysia, right? Where admittedly you probably need a different level of tool.
Yeah.
And so my personal view is you try and find the best available climate so that, technology does the work for the crop so it doesn't have to. But if you can limit the amount of technology you have to invest and buy, that's also good, right? However, Manuel, the other thing I'd say is that as countries are starting to mobilize around the belief that a certain level of, food sovereignty may be needed, you also need governments, and you need to work with the governments to provide infrastructure to make this competitive, right? Look at what Holland has done. You guys have that centrally coordinated Royal Dutch Shell oil refinery that's been pumping cheap CO2 to the greenhouse industry for years. That's one of the many reasons you're wildly competitive. It's not just your production capabilities. It's also that your government centrally planned infrastructure to support this industry to be successful. And that's the kind of things we also need. So it's a multifaceted approach to make technology does some of the work, but other factors need to be incorporated to make this possible at large scale.
Yeah, I think and please continue in a bit further about the differences between the UAE and Southeast Asia. What is different towards the UAE, where you envision that is going to be a bit more tough in Southeast Asia. But
let me give. Well, one thing I would say on that is we do have the benefit that over 85% of our fresh produce is imported, right? And a huge portion of that air freighted. The environment is so extreme that you can't even efficiently store or manage cold chains of fresh produce. And because it's perishable, there's almost a protective ring. Now, that's also true of a lot of South Asian countries that aren't net producers, but not in the same level of extreme, right? It's not, the climate is more moderate. So I would say that fundamentally the entire cost curve is a bit lower in Asia, right? You ultimately there are some unique advantages or demands in the Middle East that don't exist in the same level of extreme in the other markets. But what I will say is also because the climate's more moderate, the level of investment needed to produce a different level of production quality and sustainability is also lower. It's a more moderate environment to invest in Asia.
Yeah, I think what is very enjoyable to see from Pure Harvest compared with conventional investors is that you guys take the market, certainly that premium local market, with you, and so the market adopts together with Pure Harvest instead of investors waiting for the market to develop and then invest in 10 years or 12 years from now.
What do you bring up a really important point that I'd say to those who are producers here and all. In the end, if we wait for the market to happen, it's going to happen too late, right? These countries need to be building food infrastructure to secure supply and to develop a fruit and veg market, which is critical to the nutrition palate of a human. And especially in these maturing economies where they're moving from subsistence to proper middle classes and to wealth, this is needed, but you can't wait until it's critically needed to invest. It takes years to build this infrastructure. And my fear is when all these countries finally wake up and jump in the market at the same time, well, then the supply chain won't be able to handle it to build the infrastructure. So then you're going to run the prices up, build your infrastructure at 2 times the cost you would have 5 years ago. And so I believe that it's incumbent upon us as an industry to drive this adoption forward. And that includes taking risks like building a pilot farm like we did, and developing the market, or building a couple of farms. But that requires us getting investors comfortable to support doing that. And to do that, we have to be credible. We have to deliver on our commitments. Manuel, you know this also. I fear that there have been a number of industry participants in controlled environment ag that have oversold the promise of their solutions, particularly vertical farms, and as a result have burned some investor capital. Well, that isn't helping, right? That sends people it becomes difficult to separate, what's the expression, the baby with the bathwater? People start saying CEA is uninvestable when that's not true. It was just a specific level of technology and investment that was uneconomic. And as a result, that money is, or that those sins of others are affecting the ability to drive adoption of this industry.
Yeah, I think that's also why Singapore is becoming quite unique, because it has actually missionized the 30-30 goal, where they want to grow towards that important point of a foundation and culture change, that people actually perceive things differently. And the other thing that we've seen last week, or this week to be exact, is that one of the major retail chains in the world has banned flight transport of vegetables and fruits. And perhaps we will see more changes in the supermarkets. But to touch base on this one minor topic, because we have more slides for us to show, how do you get these supermarkets along with this way of thinking, instead of continuously pushing these super premium products that come from far, far away? Let's say strawberries, 40 Sing dollars a kilo.
Manuel, it's a very easy answer, is that fundamentally most of these supermarkets are, private and or, capitalist entities. They are motivated by the sales per square foot and the contribution margin per square foot of their store real estate, right? And if you're focusing on a modern retailer, for instance, you need to make it very clear how not only do they achieve their goals on better quality and product mix, sustainability, et cetera, because they do care about these things, but they don't care to them to the point to merchandise a 40% premium product, because they don't believe their consumers will pay for it, or they'll have, they essentially, if they put you on the shelf, they have to remove something else. You need to make very clear why the economic argument of the product you're going to put in is going to increase the total pie to them as well, right? And that's where I think a lot of CEA players go wrong. They build a solution, say, we built it, why won't you come? I have this fantastic leafy green at 40%, 50% premium to what you currently pay, but with all these attributes. What you didn't think through is, does the consumer care? And then does the consumer even get to care? Because if the retailer, who's the customer, because remember, there's a customer and a consumer. The customer is the retailer, the consumer is the retailer's customer. And you've got to be serving both their needs. It needs to be desirable and affordable to the consumer after the retailer makes his money. And you need to make sure that the retailer is going to make money on your product too, and not have a ton of loss and shrinkage and et cetera. That's where I think it comes down to, Manuel. It has to be a powerful economic argument that also touches on the quality, availability, affordability, sustainability, and all the other benefits. But the core thing is they need to believe that this is a profitable decision to be merchandising you and ripping something else off the shelf to put you in its place.
Looking ahead of the curve with the climate changes that we have seen, with floods and no sun, for example, for 6 weeks, drought in some parts, things are gonna get worse, aren't they? In terms of water scarcity and other situations. Of course, you have also missionized this part of changes in your future business development.
Absolutely, Manuel. A huge portion, when I said that in the beginning, purpose, what I got really excited about in this sector is that I absolutely see, populations are growing, and we need 70% more food by 2050 to feed 9.5 billion people. Well, we're not making more land, and we're certainly not making more water, and water is food. And so there is a absolute challenge coming of demand exceeding supply. And then, so we need to become, technology has a role in that, as does less waste, right? So there's supply side and demand side problems that need to tackle this problem. But on the other problems, the population growth and the demand growth, we have less water, and water security is becoming uncertain. You mentioned global drought patterns, et cetera, but also a bunch of the food producing pieces of the world, like the United States and China, their own water is running out. Look at like the Southwest in Arizona, in America now, Arizona, where I'm from, is the Colorado River doesn't even reach Mexico anymore. It used to make it to the bottom of Mexico, right? And California and Arizona can't even get enough water for their needs. And this is now a crisis. The water wars are here. It's not like coming anymore. And so that's a problem. But then also, Manuel, the comment on sustainability. If we essentially fly around sacks of water using jet fuel, which is what air freighting produce around, it's so wildly unsustainable and even irresponsible that it has to change. And now when the world's starting to, charge for carbon, and that's increasing, that'll be another trend that makes freighting food in the current food trade system not work. So yeah. I believe, Manuel, that this is already here. It's only going to get louder and more exacerbated in the years to come. And then you have these exogenous shocks like COVID. You have the war in Ukraine, Russia, and what that did to fertilizers and food security around the world. These shocks are here. The shelves are empty in the United Kingdom. You've probably seen those articles over the last many days, right? It's not like only the developing markets that will be stricken by this. It'll be everybody. But the problem is the developed markets has more wealth. They can go now when scarcity begins, those with the wealth will buy all the world market and drive prices up. And then the developing market faces more scarcity and more food nationalism. So all of these trends are quite scary.
Yeah. Let's go to your next slide. I think you will touch upon some of these subjects.
Yeah. Actually, funny, you know it's coming. But this is where I was talking about why is this industry needed, right? This isn't, I believe, Manuel, whether Pure Harvest or Priva drive this forward, this is inevitable. We don't have the option to continue to farm the way we used to. It just isn't possible anymore. For the first time in all of human history, yields are beginning to fall, not rise. We've always, through innovation and development of fertilizers and pesticides and in various technologies that have been developed, we've increased the yield of food forever. And that's how we've kept up with the growth of humanity. Well, now it's going the other way. And we have huge environmental factors like climate change accelerating that decline. And so I believe that controlled environment ag is inevitable. It's just how fast do we adapt to bringing more food indoors and into environment using technologies and energy efficiency and ideally renewable energy to drive securing our food supply for the future, right? And I think I covered these points already. But I wanted to show that these risks are here, right? These are acute. These are all headlines recently. China running out of water and how that would be a global catastrophe. I remind you, China supplies like half of the vegetables and a third of the fruits of all of Asia. And so it's a major challenge. And then you're seeing things like food protectionism in the top left, right? Countries like Malaysia and India even banning the exports of their food. What is the first thing a country does when its own food supply for its own people is under attack? It stops exporting, right? And it should. Its sovereign responsibility is to protect its own people. And so I think this becomes a major challenge to countries that are not producing enough of their own food or don't have a network of trade relationships that support and embolden their food security strategy. Mm-hmm. Now, what are we doing about that, right? We're fundamentally what we call IoT-enabled agriculture. We are not a tech company because we sell produce to make money. We're farmers, but we use technologies to make possible food production, including, Manuel, as you well know, Priva is a key partner of us, a key enabling technology that we integrate in our builds to make possible this. We use beneficial insects, not chemicals, not poisons, to be able to protect our food. We get much higher yield than a traditional, this, by the way, 10 times the yield and a seventh of water use is versus a mid-tech farm, versus fields were 30 to 35 times more efficient, and the water, over 20 times more efficient. We use about 5% of the water of a field farm. And we're able to offer lower prices to our consumers versus their comparable quality imports versus extremely low quality seasonal production. We're a premium. But admittedly, that product is only allowed to even exist because the governments don't charge for water. The moment, if you put a market price on water, the local production will be gone, like gone, right? There will be none because you couldn't afford, the water's worth more than the food being produced. And that needs to change, right? And I think that's true in many markets. So one day when we talked about charging for carbon, when countries start to care about water conservation and start to charge for it, you're going to have a reckoning, right, in traditional agriculture. And so
it comes in a bit slowly by announcements until everybody needs to pay tax for the use of water. I remember like last week, Singapore initiated carbon tax. So very progressive people that have that dilute the climate, they need to pay a tax nowadays. And I think this you will see more and more. And chemical food safety is one of the biggest concerns, predominantly in Southeast Asia, away from the premium, super premium segment. And that is just 5-6 times the chemical residue than people are allowed to consume in the US, for example. So I think yeah, this should also solve a big problem of IPM. So,
Well,
I
Manuel,
have-
you mentioned the food safety thing. I also think there's challenges. For example, you mentioned the Cameron Highlands in Malaysia. There are problems of contamination now, and farms are struggling to farm in the current methods because of a long history of heavy chemical use. And so these problems are also happening in Mexico, for example, in Monterrey and around in Mexico. So this, and now soon in Almeria, Spain, it's happening. So this is happening in supply is getting attacked because you can't continue to produce the way we used to.
Yeah, we have one question, Sky, if you don't mind shedding some light on, are you intending to go from premium to mass consumers who look for—
We already do. So let me mention, we already do. So we produce mass market, like loose products that we sell at a much lower price, unbranded or in a hero brand. We call it, our hero brand is called Mahali. It's the Arabic word for local. And we sell that product, which ends in the market in wholesalers and into HoReCa. We also sell in the premium end in branded, modern, what you saw in that image in Spinnies. So already we do. But what you will see from us in the future is a lot more of that, right? I call it the airline model, right? You make margins in the more expensive seats like business class, and then you cover your fixed costs in the cheap seats, right? Because we want to serve a lot of food to a lot of people and not, but we, like many companies, you start where the margins are higher, where you can establish a brand, where you can get some scale to then be able to go down market, right? And that we're finally getting to that escape velocity scale that will enable us to serve more and more of the market. So the answer is yes. Over the next 5 to 10 years, you should be able to see a lot more of us coming out in not only accessing more of that market in the way that we are now with multiple products in different price levels and SKUs, but also actually we're developing new lower tech farms that are much lower cost farms for more moderate climates like say Egypt or Malaysia. And you'll see us deploying both mid-tech and high-tech farms to access a broader addressable market.
Thank you.
So
Thank you. I think we also I need to keep watching the time.
Yeah,
we
I
have
was going to say
around
time check. Why don't I skip ahead to a few things? One of the things that one of the questions was what makes us unique, Manuel. I want to highlight to people, and I think this is important to any of the aspiring companies, that like intellectual property, and call it intangible assets, is a much broader pool of things than people realize. It isn't patents. In fact, that's only one tiny subsegment of intellectual property, and even worse, it's one that's very hard to protect. So what I want to highlight to people is that what have we done to build a unique business? And I mentioned previously that we built all of these capabilities you see on the right, and these 7 capabilities in one company. We're an early mover. We have now years of performance data that we use to inform our designs. We're also developing now a machine learning algorithm that will automate our climate management systems. We've hired the former head of autonomous driving at Lyft to drive that effort. We have world-leading yields and performance, so we really have learned and gotten better and better about growing crops in the systems. We have a very good team, and that team is getting more experienced with time. But also, we partner with seed companies, technology partners like Priva, also with the service firms that have unique capabilities like Larson, right? Larson Greenhouse Consulting, and Thomas Larson sits on our board. So it is actually a multifaceted approach to how to build a company with a broad set of capabilities that are not only technology, but operations, marketing, and sales, all the things necessary to deliver the outcome of high quality fresh produce at a better cost, right? And I want to mention, how do we protect that? Well, like any moat, it's many protections: trade secrets, technology licenses and seed licenses, commercial agreements, NDAs, domains, trademarks, regulatory approvals. There's an entire pool of intangible assets that protect a company like this. It isn't just tech, right? Admittedly, also, guys, hardware is historically hard. I always use the example of Apple and Samsung. Apple started the iPhone market. Samsung now makes 40% of the iPhone. Apple has 22,000 patents, but you can't tell the phones apart, right? So how protected are those patents, and how protected is that hardware innovation, right? It's very hard. And over time, those competitive edges get competed away. What remains are things like a brand, an enduring capability, like a repeatable capability to farm and to operate in markets and develop new markets. These are the things that become sustainable competitive advantages, not some novel climate hardware innovation, right? And I just wanted to share that with people as they ask. I get a lot of questions about that, about what makes you unique. It's hard to pinpoint because it's actually a lot of things. We are building a unique company, and then a culture that supports that and that hires and recruits the right people to deliver outcomes. We don't have one specific innovation that is the reason this company's a success.
Yeah, I like the thing that you said earlier, that you look at greenhouses or as assets, and you look at them for 3 decades plus, possibly.
Yes.
And people often when they visit the Netherlands and you have this greenhouse valley where all the dense greenhouses are located, they ask the one question, like, how old are these greenhouses? And they're quite surprised that they are like 40, 50 years old and still intact. And when we look to compare to Southeast Asia, I think the first greenhouses have been started 15 to 20 years ago on plastic poly. But that's an asset of 5 years, 6 years that they need to redo. How do you look at this?
Again, it's about I call it the LCTA, the lowest cost but technically acceptable solution to achieve the outcome. So when I mentioned a portfolio of assets, we'll have high-tech assets that are 40, 50 years, like what our high-tech greenhouses here in the UAE and Saudi. We also will have mid-tech assets that are, for example, polyhouses, but targeting that we replace certain elements of them and keep them probably in a 15 to 20 year useful life, but not a 5 year and not a 30 or 40 or 50 year. So it'll be a portfolio of assets, but I think you're right, Manuel. That comment I made earlier about focusing on yield, thinking differently, we are thinking about the yield an asset can generate to generate a return for investors, but also farm responsibly. And we're not thinking about, like, CapEx is sort of irrelevant. It's more about CapEx per unit or kilogram of production, and at what quality level and what price will that quality level justify in the market. It's a much more complex equation. It's also, though, Manuel, why one of the challenges when people ask, I get a common question, can you just build small ones for smallhold farmers? The answer is no, right? I wish I had a better answer to the food security panels I sit on and et cetera, but the answer is no. Why? The capital intensity, complexity, the disciplines, the multitude of disciplines you need to operate at this scale and at the world-leading efficiency is too great for any individual entrepreneur, right? However, could there be other business models in contract farming and other that enable that, but with the support of a larger player? Yes, and we're working on those. But I want to highlight that it is a challenging thing that if you're just a single plot of land, a hectare, trying to do this level of farming, it's simply impossible, right? And I just want to be objective about that and not have people continue to lie and be delusional about the availability of that solution. But that doesn't mean there's no home for the smallhold farmer. I think there just needs to be, we, the industry, need to innovate new models that make this possible to support the adoption of these technologies in smallhold farms.
Yeah, it is quite a difference between when we look to the Western world or Australia and Asia. And as you know, Asia or APAC has been home to around 420 million smallholders, where it originated as a currency that you get a rice paddy to exchange it for other goods or services. And that was basically your currency. And that evolved into all these small plots of family-oriented businesses. While in the West, we were just mass scaling, automating, machinery. And now, since everything is changing, food safety and climate change and the fast declining numbers of growers and farmers in these smallholders, what's next?
Well, I mean, also, Manuel, think about in a lot of these countries, I just got back from Philippines and I know the stats in Korea, but over 2/3 of farmers are over 60 years old. Young people are not entering this industry. Like, this is a major challenge to the concept of just passing the pitchfork down to the next farmer, right? It's not happening. And also you have in some countries like India or even the Middle East, when someone passes, the land gets broken up to the kids. So you keep breaking the parcel of land smaller and smaller and smaller. That is not, when you think of fundamentally farming as a manufacturing process, since when in the beginning of the Industrial Revolution did scaling down a process make it more efficient?
Yeah,
it's just not a fact, right? You need to scale it up to make. So unfortunately, that dynamic isn't working in the favor of making farming more efficient. So, but we need to change that. Make, for example, plot owners can cooperate to collectively build a large-scale farming asset, right? But these types of models are needed. We need sort of a change in thinking of the landowners and farmers themselves, but also the support in the industry to support them to achieve and actually build economic solutions, not keep selling, a one-size-fits-all widget into a solution that's fundamentally failing, right? Yeah. And that's a belief we have. So our goal is, my dream one day as Pure Harvest is a technology-enabled service provider. I don't necessarily need to own assets in every market in the world, but to enable someone to build the right assets, to commercialize their production, et cetera, that's where we're headed, that we enable farmers. And I think that that's a more scalable model than me raising money and building every asset on the planet, which is just not, we're not CBR or Richard Ellis wanting to own office buildings. You know?
Sky, we're reaching the time here. I've just a few things. So we've touched on many points on your biography and how you started, which background you had, and how you wanted to change things. What Pure Harvest actually is, and what it embeds, and what culture it conducts daily, internally and also externally. The challenges, of course, in the harsh climates. You know, the UAE is a bit drier, but also sometimes much tougher than Southeast Asia. Humidity, however, and energy bills remains a big challenge. I think for many that we have spoken to in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia, Singapore, and other countries, is that Pure Harvest embeds change. I think when they see your logo, it associates with change, some premium locally available. And that's a good thing. I think also we, as the Joint Chamber of Commerce in Southeast Asia, and also as a technology provider, that is an important move for the movement for the future, to initiate hopefully a domino effect somewhere this decade. But one last question, and maybe a good closing question: what can the region expect from Pure Harvest?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for the comments you said, Manuel, and Priva has been a wonderful partner of ours, but also to those in Asia, we are interested in this market. Where are we going to be in this market? You're going to see probably over the next year a couple of announcements of us entering markets either directly, like we did in Singapore, or via partners. So securing a large-scale strategic partner that will help us to access and develop a very significant multi-phase build-out in the markets. For example, my engagements in the Philippines and in Korea. So you will see more of us, and also see us trying to take the, sort of a capability, and that we call it the miracle in the desert that we built, and then transfer that capability into these new markets. And over time, as you mentioned, Manuel, we don't see Pure Harvest as just a product or a company. We see it as a movement. And we want to bring that movement into these markets that drive awareness. It is healthy for us. We're never going to have 100% of a retailer, right? What retailer would dare concentrate its procurement that way? I think at best, you can have a 20% market share. That means there's at least another 80% of the market available, even if we're successful, right? So my view is that we want to drive a movement and support the development of this industry in all of these markets, helping these countries target developing food, security, and to some level food sovereignty, at least in fresh produce, which can't be stored. It's perishable. It's critical to health, but also water conservation, a much more efficient farming system. I mentioned economic diversification. We think there's a lot of good jobs. You want to get people, not have farmers all be over 60 and nobody coming into the industry instead of fleeing to cities. The way we farm is much more enjoyable. It's a cool and fun tech-enabled industry. You wear a lab coat, not on your hands and knees in poisons. And I think that that's a really exciting new industry that I think will invite young people back to really build on the industry. And then also I mentioned, last but not least, sustainability, right? We can't fly around food anymore. We can't keep doing what we're doing, and for all the reasons we said around climate change. We think that this industry has a lot of legs. I think over the next 50 years, you'll see mass, tens or hundreds of billions of capital deployed in controlled environment ag to change how we farm. Because using spraying field irrigation in Arizona is not sustainable anymore. And I hope that we and you, Priva, will be part of driving the adoption of this industry and growing this industry in the years to come, and certainly in Asia.
Definitely. I think the last thing you've said is very important. There's no way around it. Whether you like the economics or not, it's coming, and we need to adapt. The climate is not going to reverse and say, we're going to change it for you because you don't want to adapt. So
well, I think, Manuel, if I could say one other thing to whatever regulators might be listening on the phone, when you mark to market the cost of water, go recalculate the cost of production of traditional ag, right? And so really, I think until the world prices water and doesn't pretend that it's an unlimited, unscarce resource, there's a lot of discussion on water will be valued greater than oil. Well, it's already happening in some places. Like, you don't realize it until you run out of water. Look at South Africa. And when that happens, you'll suddenly say, is the traditional ag really that cheap? And so I actually think, Manuel, when you mentioned the cost of it, this is the only cost structure that makes sense. But what the problem is that the current one lives in a subsidized world that we don't acknowledge, and that's just not sustainable. So it's inevitable. It's a question of how fast does this happen and how much damage have we done to water, to aquifers, how late are we in adopting and driving this so that we actually have have made headway on transferring the supply base out of traditional ag into more resource efficient ways. How soon does it happen?
Yeah. And with that being said, Sky, thank you very much for the leadership. I think it's exactly what the region needs at the moment, as we have assessed it for more than a decade. And we hope to taste some very sweet strawberries and some good ripe, tasty tomatoes in the region. And on behalf of all the chambers from Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, the Philippines, and Indonesia, thank you very much for sharing some light and insights on a progressive CAA culture.
Well, Pure Harvest Smart Farms, we thank you and for your interest, and we hope to see many of you and interact with you in the markets as we come. We'll also be at the Singapore Ag Tech Innovation Summit again this year, and so please do engage with us, and also hopefully soon we'll be in a market near you. Please try the product. I hope you'll enjoy it. Take care. Thank you, Manuel.